Thanksgiving is just a few days away, but as many of us look forward to the holiday and the end of a short work week, something else looms ahead. The long and slow drive to your celebration. In fact, if you're watching me now, you've waited too long to get out of town. But it's not just Thanksgiving. In the last 5 years, more than 300,000 cars and trucks have been added in and around Boston, according to a new report from the Globe Spotlight team. The series called Seeing Red looked into why this area suffers from some of the worst traffic in the country, putting part of the blame on the city's struggling transportation system and the political gridlock that had kept both roads and rails from getting much better. And while Governor Baker is quick to point to recent renovations of the green, red, and orange lines and to a new bill that, if passed, would put $18 billion towards reducing traffic and fixing the T, those aren't the only transportation-related problems plaguing the administration. There's also the issue of safety and the Registry of Motor Vehicles' failure to process alerts from other states about Massachusetts drivers, which allowed thousands of people who should have had their licenses revoked, including the one who killed 7 motorcyclists in New Hampshire, to stay on the road. Since the crash, the State Department of Transportation has suspended more than 2,000 of those licenses, and the governor hired a firm to conduct an independent report into how the system failed. Here to provide insight into that report and other ongoing issues is Transportation Secretary Stephanie Pollack. It's great to see you. Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Baker administration files an $18 billion transportation bill. Something called A Better City said we need at least roughly 3 times that much over the next 20 years. Baker administration says we don't need any new tax revenues. Virtually every advocate or advocacy group in the transportation world says we do. Do you worry that you might be wrong and they might be right, Secretary?
I think that we may be having 2 different discussions because we traditionally look at 5 or 10 years of investment in the transportation field, and we just completed pretty comprehensive asset and other plans, and we did identify a need for more revenue. We're not saying that we don't need to invest more. We just put a plan on the table that invests more using sources that we think are sensible. But no, I'm pretty confident that I know how much we need to spend in the next 5 or 10 years. Some of the other numbers are looking 20 and 30 years out.
So if the legislature, the Senate and House chair of the Transportation Committee were here a couple of months ago, said we absolutely need new tax revenue and we need it soon. If they passed a bill, say a gas tax or something that's not on the Baker list of new revenue sources, would the governor veto it? Or if the legislature said it was needed, would he say, I'm not crazy about it, but let's go?
I don't think that's a decision that we're going to make in advance. You know, the governor, he never says that. I think what we are asking for people to think about is, what do you want us to spend money on, how much, and how soon? And then make sure we're fair to the taxpayers. No taxpayer, even the people calling for gas taxes, don't want us to raise taxes today and spend the money 10 or 15 years from now. We're still just beginning to spend the gas tax increase from 2013 as the orange and red line cars come in. There's a long lead time in transportation.
But you know, I mean, you 2 of the smartest people in state government are you and your boss. But you know the average person that's stuck in traffic or stuck on the T says the answer to all those questions is immediately, I want everything fixed as soon as I can. And by the way, one of the people on that list is a good buddy of your boss's. The mayor is on Commonwealth Magazine's podcast today, and he says, we think we have to think bold here in Massachusetts. I don't think we think bold enough. And he indicated he'd be interested in one of those regional ballot questions for financing, potentially just like Los Angeles did with, what, $120 billion, whatever it was. Again, if it turns out that not the state, but individual regions said, we want to go to the voters and say, let's approve new revenue in addition to whatever the Baker administration does, obviously have to be approved by the legislature and signed by the governor. Would he sign that?
Don't think we're going to answer that question unless the legislature sends that up there. But
so how do people locally know how to proceed? If they're frustrated and want to take matters into their own hands, don't you think you and the governor owe them an answer in advance? If you put your energy into this, will buy in if the voters buy in? No?
So we have a process by which we talk to cities and towns all the time We've put more money on the table for them to do their Chapter 90 local roads, to fix local bridges that are in bad shape. Our $18 billion bond bill proposes more money for cities and towns for complete streets, for doing paving projects. I mean, people say they want us to spend money fixing our structurally deficient bridges and fixing pavement. That's what we proposed in the bond bill. The people who are talking about larger numbers are talking about projects that are not just years, but in some cases decades away.
One of the things in the Globe series, which I'm sure you read, that struck me, one of the many things that struck me, is obviously your goal. I mentioned this to the governor on the radio the other day. Is the goal is to get people out of cars and onto mass transit. I mean, everybody agrees on that. But the Globe noted something I guess most of us knew. There have been 2 transit fare increases in your time there, and not an additional nickel collected from drivers, which seems to sort of be asked backwards, encouraging behavior you want to discourage, driving, and discouraging behavior you want to encourage, namely the T. That's a fair criticism, isn't it?
So what we charge people, whether they're people who are taking the T or people who are driving, are fees. They're supposed to cover our costs. So current tolls cover the costs of repairing the toll roads. Fares needed to be raised to cover the costs of running the T. If folks want us to talk about raising money from drivers for reasons that are not paying costs, but that are to change behavior, that's a pretty big public policy conversation.
Don't you buy into that notion that if you make a service or a product more expensive, it's going to encourage somebody to look for an alternative? I mean, that's your goal, isn't it?
But traffic is so awful that if people actually had an alternative to the awful traffic, I'm not sure that paying a little bit more is what would make the biggest difference. The places that have really gotten people to do more walking and biking transit have improved the quality of walking, biking, and transit, so people choose them. If you charge people a fee for driving when they don't have a better alternative, you're punishing them.
Well, how about the MIT experiment that I didn't even know about until I read about it also on the Globe, that essentially they gave people Charlie cards and, for simplifying, but took away their free parking access in MIT, and they said there was a dramatic shift towards T use and away from cars. So those kinds of financial incentives work, no?
Because they gave people, they didn't raise the parking price and not give them the transit passes. They did both. That's what I'm saying. You have to do both at the same time.
They made the T cheaper.
They did, and we worked with MIT on those transit passes, and I've met with other universities who have declined to do that, and I don't price parking. So
okay.
That's not a thing the state can do.
One more thing about this. Is it fair to call you, in some cases, experiment-phobic? Congestion pricing, for example. There was a pilot proposed, I guess, a year or so ago. The governor was not into that. In the Globe series, there was a discussion about London's congestion pricing, a toll to get into the city. The quote from, I don't know if it was you or your administration, despite 16 years of this, the miles driven are essentially flat. The people from London said, in fact, the miles driven has been cut in half. And your response, well, it's not in the fact-based portion of our report. I don't even know. What does that mean, by the way? It's not in the fact-based.
So in the recommendations section of the report, we have a chapter on congestion pricing where we have little vignettes about some ideas that different people asked us to look into. So we did that. The important point is, no, we're not at all phobic about experiments. We started running early morning bus service, and when it worked, we increased it. We started running late night bus service, and when it worked, we increased it. We're doing a 2-year pilot on rail service in western Massachusetts down to New York, which people have asked us for. I prefer to actually try things and see if they work before we make them permanent.
Why not congestion pricing? I have to say that of all the calls we get on the radio, I know it's anecdotal, non-scientific, that seems to be the thing that people talk about the most. Why not try it? And if it doesn't work, don't do it.
Only if you have an alternative so that you can not be in that congestion. And so we are focused on giving people better choices for walking, biking, and transit. The congestion itself should drive people to experiment with those choices. But if they don't have choices, all congestion pricing is doing is punishing people. It's not changing their behavior.
Were you wrong about the London thing, by the way? Factually, were they right and you wrong?
So London is more congested than Boston as a whole. There is a portion of London where there has been a congestion fee that there's some data that says is working and some data that says it's not as great. The one question I would ask those people who are proposing that is, if it's as popular as they say and it's as effective they say, how come they've never increased it to cover more of the City of London?
Can we switch to the Registry of Motor Vehicles, the horror, and I'm sure you felt exactly the same way we all did. There was a story in the Globe the other day about Grant Thornton, who was the firm you hired, not being willing to turn over the interview records to the legislature that is doing oversight hearings. The Baker administration said, we're with the legislature 100% on this. The governor confirmed that on the radio with us the other day. Are you close to, I mean, again, I know you know this. We are paying for this.
So here's the good news. The governor said we were going to keep pressing them. We have kept pressing them, and as of today, they've turned those over.
They have, as of today. So the records the legislature is looking for.
Just did it.
That is actually.
So, and because we said all along that we thought it was the right thing to do, the company had some concerns. We agreed 100% that it was the legislature's right to see those documents. So they were literally just turned over in the last few hours.
I think it's fabulous news. I think it's great you guys pushed them that way. Are you convinced that no one, the registrar obviously resigned as soon as this became public. Are you convinced that no one in the administration, no one outside of the RMV, had any knowledge of the ignoring of these citations, these alerts coming in from other jurisdictions?
Look, we hired Grant Thornton. We gave them unlimited access to our computers, to written documents, and to the people that they needed to interview. They were able to find no evidence that the registrar had shared that information with anybody outside her team.
Are you convinced that's right?
I am, and this is why, because in the only 3 or 4 months since we learned about this, we have turned the registry inside out. We have changed all the processes. All the mail is being opened. We're exchanging information electronically with some states. We've gone back into the backlog that was put into archives long before we were in administration. And had I been made aware of this issue, why wouldn't I have done the same thing then? So the fact that we've been able to jump on it in 3 months, I hope convinces people that we didn't know, because had I known, I would have done when I found out exactly what we've been doing for the last 3 months.
Back to the T for a second. Do people like me and the media and others make too much of your boss not riding the T in commuter rail? Is it, I mean, we discussed this with him the other day. I know he rode the T recently. He said he's rode the commuter rail a lot when he was a private citizen, but hasn't since. Do we make too much out of this, or is there a legitimate argument to be made that he might feel the pain in a more immediate way, which might be helpful?
You know, at this point...
Used to work for a guy, by the way, I just realized, Michael Dukakis, who obviously elevated that to an art form. I forgot until I was staring at you, but go ahead.
So, you know, I'm a regular T rider. General Manager Pollack is a regular T rider. We encourage people at our agencies to use the T. The T is really important, don't get me wrong. It's one of the most important things that I work on every single day. But the congestion thing, we're not going to take every single person who drives into Boston every day and put them on the T. That is not a realistic solution.
But should your boss ride the T every once in a while?
So my boss feels the pain on the roads instead of feeling it on the T. We are all well aware that the current system needs to get better so people have reliable ways of getting where they're going.
Okay, in the last 30 seconds, say something about what you're doing that should cause people to give thanks and have hope that a dramatic improvement's going to be in their relatively immediate future.
We're adding close to 100,000 seats for people on commuter rail, the Red Line and the Orange Line. This is not a fantasy. This does not require a tax increase. Not only are all the plans underway, every single construction contract has been procured. It's under construction. It will be done in the next few years.
How's your blood pressure?
I haven't been to the doctor lately. Haven't had enough time.
Secretary Pollack, it's really good to see you. I really appreciate your time.